Hi, everybody. Welcome to Bone2Pick. I am Michael Davis, and I am so pleased to have our guest this month, the great Alan Ferber. He is a multi-Grammy nominated composer, trombonist, and band leader. Certainly one of the most in-demand trombone players in New York and on the international jazz scene. He has just released his 8th CD as a leader entitled Jigsaw, and we're going to spend a lot of time talking about that incredible project. He has appeared on the Downbeat International Critics Poll, the Readers Poll. His previous CDs have been nominated for Grammy Awards. He received a 4-star review from Downbeat. Also, Downbeat named his CD one of the best CDs of the year. His discography is extremely impressive, as you might imagine. Includes working with artists from Esperanza Spalding, Ted Nash, Miguel Zenon, Lee Konitz, Sufjan Stevens, The National, Paul Simon, Peter Gabriel, just to name a few. He's currently on the faculty at New York University, and he is a staunch Golden State Warrior fan, which I'm pleased to share that passion with him. I assume that you struggled through the decades like I did of the dark ages, but and I have been a fan of Alan's for many, many years now, and I in researching for this interview, I found a quote that I thought really described it best. Among the many great reviews he has of his projects, the Wall Street Journal described his music as somehow both old school and cutting edge, and I thought that was really a great way to describe it, both from as a composer and as a trombone player. Just a wonderful musician. And without further ado, Alan, thanks so much for taking time to come over to New City today. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
Let's jump in and talk about, reference the Bay Area. Let's talk about you growing up in the Bay Area in Oakland, and maybe some of the, your early influences, your teachers who made an impact on you from the early ages.
Well, I grew up in I was born in Oakland, but grew up in a small town called Moraga, which is just a sleepy little town, though it's nestled amongst a lot of larger, culturally vibrant areas like Berkeley and San Francisco, Oakland. So I had a very nurturing upbringing in this small community, but certainly my parents and my mother, actually, will probably get into it, comes from a entertainment background. My grandmother, my great-grandmother.
Oh, wow.
So there was always a priority for my parents to get me in front of live performance, surrounded with music, surrounded by music. I grew up also in the Bay Area, which is also traditionally known as an area that has put a high priority on music education.
Sure. Yeah.
And my high school provided a lot of opportunities for me, and around the area too, I was just able to access a lot of things, a lot of performance opportunities, jazz camps like the Stanford Jazz Workshop, which was my first jazz camp. A workshop that the Eastman School of Music put together, Fred Sturm specifically in Monterey, which I did for several years. So it was just a great place to grow up. And I would really, probably the most important first influence in terms of trombone, of course, first influence for me, besides my parents, but for trombone specifically was a Bay Area trombonist. He still lives there, and he's still very in demand. Dean Hubbard, who for me he was my first teacher. He got me started on my first routines. He established sort of a daily routine for me. He told me what that even means in terms of playing the trombone. It got me started on the Schlossberg books and the Marsteller books.
Yeah,
all the things that the fundamental things that I think every good teacher, particularly with a new student, helps to set up. So Dean got me also exposed to jazz trombone. I specifically remember, and it's so strange when I think about our first lesson because it was such a moment. We were doing all these little rote exercises, and at the end I said, "Excuse me, Mr. Hubbard, would you mind could we play a little jazz? I don't know much about it, but I'd love to hear you play a little bit." So he put on a Jamie Ebersol, and it starts to play. It's like Nothing But the Blues. I think it's Volume 2 or something.
Right.
It's an F blues, and he starts to play a solo. And meanwhile, I've got my tape recorder I'm recording the lesson, and he starts to play a solo. And at that moment, at that moment, for some reason, I specifically remember what the room smelled like. Like, I remember every little detail. It was one of those moments, you know, sometimes when you have these moments in your life where something really life-changing is occurring in that moment, the smell, everything, you know, the way the fluorescent lights were buzzing. I remember like the band trophies behind him. It was like, it was so strange. I remember that so specifically, his khaki pants and this cologne. Starts playing this solo, and I was like, what is that? That's incredible. And then, of course, I just hacked my way through it. And I went home and wore that tape out. I still have it. And that's really was the first solo I ever learned. It was such a big moment for me in terms of starting my passion for the trombone.
Wow, that is amazing. What a story. You obviously have the passion. It's like to have all that in your memories. That's fantastic. Well, thanks for sharing that, Alan. Let's talk a little bit about your time at UCLA. I know you went from the Bay Area down to UCLA. Great program. Obviously, many great teachers in Los Angeles and great influences. Maybe you could share some of your memories of that time and studying there.
Yeah, UCLA was, in retrospect, a great place for me to go to college. I didn't, as most high schoolers going out, I didn't really know what I was doing, nor did I have a huge amount of clarity in terms of what I wanted to study. But I auditioned down there, and I got in through the music program on a scholarship, which was obviously helpful. And I think for me it was good. It wasn't too far from where I grew up, but it was obviously it was enough. It was 5.5 hours away. It was enough of a distance where I could really establish becoming an individual or becoming self-sufficient without my parents just being around all the time. It also did help that I was there with my brother. I have a twin brother who's a drummer, professional drummer now, and a very successful one, who I grew up with learning how to play this music together. And so we went down to LA together, and we happened to hit it at a very good time, because in the department at that time were people that I still have a lot of musical associations with, like there was a trumpet player named John DeVersa there,
sure,
who was in my class. He's now the head of the department at University of Miami. And he really helped me out, took me under his wing. These people all came from really musical families. So John's father, Jay, was one of the busier studio trumpet players in LA for many, many years.
Sure, yeah.
A guy named Justin Morell is a guitarist. His dad, John Morell, was a very prominent guitar, or is, but he played with Miles Davis. He also did a lot of studio work. Gretchen Parlato was in my class. She's a very successful singer now. A bass player named Todd Sikafus. I mean, I could go on and on, but in addition to that, there were faculty members that were also really nurturing. Kenny Burrell led the program, and it was a new program, so there were, it was like there were some things they were working out, but they were all invested in giving us opportunities. I mean, I had a class with Billy Higgins, where what that essentially consisted of was us showing up and playing mostly monk tunes with Billy Higgins. I mean, it's like how. And he didn't say much either. He would just smile. He's like, and we'd either play monk tunes or Brazilian tunes or his own. I'm sorry. He would encourage us to bring in tunes, and I wasn't writing music at that point, but some of the other guys were, and I did actually. That was the first time I ever wrote a tune, because I wanted to. I mean, he was encouraging it, so why not? So. And while at UCLA, I studied trombone with my second huge mentor, Bill Booth, who I studied with for 4 years, on a weekly basis. Bill really, and Bill is, at that time and still now is one of the busiest studio trombone players, as you know, in Los Angeles. Yeah. And he was just so particular and demanding without being belligerent, you know. But he was, I mean, when you didn't do your work, you know, I remember coming in, I had a large workload of assignments to do. I didn't get a chance to practice my Roshu enough, and I'd come and basically try to sight read it in front of him. And I just remember he'd just be sitting, he'd always like sit at a distance, and he'd be like, what else do you have? Like, oh. It's like, oh boy.
I know.
It's just demoralizing, you know.
The great teachers, I think they really have that knack, right, for just shooting you down without having to do it and beating you over the head. It's just like a simple sentence, you know.
Made me feel so horrible.
What else do you have?
I mean, I remember seeing people coming out of their lessons, I mean, literally crying, not because he would do anything like, you know, inappropriate. It was just because he had he cared so much about the music and about your development as a musician that if you didn't do the work, he would let you know in his way. And I appreciated that.
Yeah, very cool. Understandable, too. And for those of you who don't know, Bill Booth, like Alan just said, he's one of the top call motion picture and studio guys in Los Angeles. And when you hear him play with the level of precision that he plays with, you can understand why that would be what he wants to pass on to his students. And very cool to hear about the program at UCLA at that time. I know I've always felt that you know, the greatness of a school is the other students that you're around. Of course, the faculty is very important, but really like being around other students at that level, that's a very cool thing.
Yeah.
Let's jump forward and talk a little bit about your early years in your career in Los Angeles. I know you mentioned you started your career. You're so known for your time in New York, obviously now many years later. But maybe talk about those first few years in Los Angeles, and then making the jump to New York, and what made you come out here.
Yeah, it was. I think one of the reasons why LA was a good place for me at that time was that when I graduated, which was in '97, that was kind of the beginning of this the swing revival. It started with I think basically it was a combination of events, but there was an enormous amount of work for live musicians, and particularly for big bands, because there was a movie called Swingers that came out around that time. It was hugely popular, and then a number of swing bands, Big Bad Voodoo Daddy and Brian Setzer Orchestra, which is a band that I eventually that was my first big touring gig. That when I graduated, there was work, so I started playing with a little swing band, and then, you know, I started playing around a little bit and got involved with some of the more busier swing bands. And one of them was led by a guy named Bill Elliott, who did a lot of film and TV scoring, and also was just an incredible writer. So I was recommended to play in Bill Elliott's band, and through Bill's band, I met a lot of the active sort of studio-oriented players in LA that really took me under their wing and helped me out. People like Alex Isles and Alan Kaplan, Charlie Marillis, Bruce Otto. I mean, these guys were extraordinarily supportive. Charlie Loper. I mean, they would all play in this band, and for me, fresh out of college, to come in, I mean, there wasn't a lot of touring big band work at that time, the way there was maybe even just 15, 20 years earlier. That was my way of cutting my teeth in a real environment, you know, in front of an audience with these heavy players, and just to sit in a section with those guys and hear them play was incredible. They got me involved in this Hoyt's Garage scene where I would go over and play these pieces. Would rotate around the room, and then so we'd have to conduct a little bit, and then we'd play, you know, every trombone part. And here I'm just looking around like, man, they're just playing so beautifully. And I think through that kind of got me hooked up a little bit with those guys. And at the same time, I mentioned the Brian Setzer Orchestra. There's a great trombone player there named George McMullen, who recommended me through just a random rehearsal I did at the Musicians Union. I had like a 12-bar blues solo, and, you know, I was playing with these guys, and he called me that night. He asked me, do you want to essentially sort of audition / join this band? It was a gig on the VH1 Fashion Awards, so it wasn't really a rehearsal. It was like, this is actually a gig, and there's horn moves, but we're not going to be able to go through them, but you're going to be taping, and like, what? I'm going right, they're going left. But I did that gig, and then they asked me to go on tour, and I ended up touring with them for a year. And
Nice.
That was my first real, you know, that's the first time I felt like, wow, I'm a professional musician now, I guess. How did that happen?
That's really cool. Yeah, I know playing with those guys, I'm sure Alex and Charlie and all of them out there, that's tremendous. So as things were going so well for you in Los Angeles, it'd be interesting to just hear your thoughts about what you know motivated you to move out to New York. It's always a scary thing when things are going pretty well, and then like to have the courage to make a move to New York. What were your memories and thoughts of what was going on in your life at that time?
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of an irresponsible decision, to be honest. I mean, I didn't really have much of a plan. I wasn't going to school in New York. I mean, I didn't know anybody. I knew one person, I should say, and you know, and I didn't really even know him. He was a mutual friend of my brother's who I had happened to pick up the phone one day. He was calling my brother for a gig, and I picked up the phone. And, hey, Matt. He said, hey, you must be Alan's brother. And I said, oh yeah, I've heard, you know, I know you. I mean, I know of you and through my brother, and it's so nice to hook up here by phone. He's like, oh yeah, man, have you ever thought about moving to New York? I live in New York. I said, well, yeah, I think about it all the time. I mean, it seems like most of my favorite records are coming out of New York. I'm, you know, obsessed with jazz, and particularly sort of like contemporary modern jazz at that time, especially. And he said, well, I have this apartment that's opening up in my building, and
Wow.
it's yours if you want it. And that was always the thing that would keep me from moving, because not only from basically not having any semblance of a plan, also like the prospect of finding a place to live always freaked me out.
Sure, yeah.
And then it just fell into my lap, and I was actually doing a transatlantic like cruise 2 weeks later with Les Brown and the Band of Renown. We're starting in England, and then we were going to dock in New York for 8 hours and then head down to Florida. And I said, well, I'm going to be in New York in a couple weeks. Maybe I can, for a few hours, maybe I can come and get the keys.
Yeah.
I mean, not even I'll check it out, but yes, I'll take it, basically is what I said. I was so excited.
Where was the apartment?
It was a great location. It was on West 19th Street between 5th and 6th.
Oh, wow.
But,
yeah.
I mean, the thing should have been condemned. It was like,
Okay.
I mean, I think a guy had just died in there, you know. Like, it was really bizarre. And it was a bunch of these tiny, I mean, literally, I could do this. I remember doing this, the walls. I could touch the walls. And it was essentially like a large closet. Guy before me had painted it dark blue, so it felt smaller than even. It was just not gonna. I mean, it was not gonna work. But there was a sink in the corner. There wasn't even a kitchen. I mean, it was just a room. There was like a shared, it was, you know, hot pot kind of thing, shared bathroom. So I saw this place and was like, oh my God, what am I thinking here? And I was living in a pretty comfortable situation in LA. Of course, the weather's always nice. It's just, you know, it's hard to leave. But that gave me the excuse to leave. I moved to New York. I moved into that place, but literally probably for a week. And I crashed with this guy, with Matt Otto. He's a saxophone player, in his kitchen. He had a large kitchen. Slept in his kitchen for a couple weeks while I found an apartment in his building in Brooklyn, which was a nice, you know, bigger apartment. Mm-hmm. Still had its issues, of course, as most New York City apartments do. But it got me here, and I'm glad it did.
Yeah, so are we. Let's talk a little bit about your nonet and your big band and how you got those started. I want to talk a lot about your latest project, Jigsaw, which is phenomenal. For those of you who have not heard it yet, get it today. It's really fantastic. But one of the things that I've always admired about you is your commitment to being a creative musician. And I for people who go down that road, I just have the utmost respect and admiration. For yourself, what was it like, you know, starting your own groups, obviously at this point, I'm sure you were writing more. And what was the process in terms of the big band, the non-ed? I know both of those are now fully working ensembles, and you're recording regularly now. But what was that like starting those?
Well, I started my first band in Los Angeles. I think for me, maybe the primary motivation was kind of looking ahead at my, I had just started my career, and I was realizing I'm getting called for these gigs, and some of them I really love, and some of them I really don't like at all. And the thought of not having control of what I was doing, any control, just being at the whim of whoever called, kind of freaked me out a little bit. And I mean, ultimately I started writing because I love music. I wanted to create music. I wanted to create something. And I love just sitting down and creating things. I always have. But there was also another motivation of taking a little more control of my own career, where I could create more opportunities for myself and kind of curate essentially my own career in a way. Ideally, I mean, it's obviously easier said than done, but at least by starting my own band and writing my own music, I could have control of what I was playing and who I was playing with, and the benefits from that too, I think, and I have students come back to me all the time. I've been teaching now for many years, and I've been NYU for 7 years, but I've been teaching for much longer than that. Long enough where students are now coming back and telling me what it is maybe that I've given them some advice that has really proven to be helpful to them. And one thing that a lot of them always say is that I would tell them, if you can create a lot of great opportunities for yourself as a musician if you just make stuff, of your own. And I think that's proven to be helpful especially in this day and age, because the infrastructure for just graduating or whatever, getting yourself on the scene, and then just being swept up on this touring gig, it's done. It's not happening anymore. I mean, perhaps it is in certain circles, but it's more now. What are you creating, and what you're creating can really bring in opportunities for you, either as a sideman or as a writer or as a trombone player, of course. But if you're just kind of sitting around and not necessarily doing anything or being proactive about creating things, it's going to be a long road for you, I think, as a musician, particularly now. But I think in a way that's always been the case. And when I first started writing, this was I had just gotten my first Yahoo account. I mean, I'm sort of a child of the, I've lived in the pre and post internet world, so, and I was in college when it started, which is another thing, that's a very formative time for us. And it was all so new. But when I was, in school, I was still of the kind of the older mentality where I was, I'm driving down Santa Monica Boulevard just looking for little cafes that look like they may want to have music, and walking into them, asking them like, would you be interested in a quartet? That kind of thing. I mean, it just seems crazy to me now, but that's what I mean. I didn't know what else to do.
I mean, that was what you would do then.
You couldn't surf around the web and oh, that looks cool. It was just like you just had to get out in your car and just find these places. So, I think that's probably a huge motivation for me. And I will say one more thing about that, in terms of writing. I love creating community around myself. And I think you can do that when you write. I mean, you create opportunities for other musicians to play, which is important, particularly if it's music that they find some joy in playing. I think that brings me so much pleasure to create these opportunities for people where they can have fun playing music. Perhaps like this is why we all started playing music, I hope. The motivation should be, I want to have fun playing this music. And when you do it, when you invest a lot of time and thought into creating something meaningful and honest, for me, that can project outward to other people, and that then you bring the best version of everybody around you out on stage. It's just I just had these CD release concerts for my new record, and I felt that it was very palpable on stage. And it can certainly go in the other direction too, which is demoralizing. You try to create something and it just doesn't fly all the time when you're playing live or whatever, and it just feels like, oh man, what am I doing? But when it does work, it's like, I can't think of, in terms of music, I can't think of a better situation to put yourself in. And I think that's a very strong case to be made for people to check out writing, because you can, it's beneficial on musical levels, of course, but it can also create these communities. And I think community is important in this music. Jazz is a community music. It's a communal music. It's not a music that's created by yourself in a little room. It's just not how, it's always been a communal music, at least at its best. It should be created together, and so whenever you can create that, I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, well said. I was sorry to miss it. Kent and I were in France last week, but I know you had your CD release, and I have to say I was looking at some of the videos of the recording from the new CD. I couldn't agree with you more. I can sense the joy that entire band has. Everybody, the music is so wonderfully done on every level, but it was just great to see how much the band just is inspired to play that music. Obviously your brothers sounds so great playing, and having that's a special dynamic, but the history you have with all the people in that band, it's a very, very cool thing. Talk to us just a little bit about it, if you will. Again, the name of the CD is Jigsaw, just coming out now, and you were nominated for a Grammy for your last CD and for one of the compositions, and I'm sure that's going to be the case with this project as well. But maybe talk a little bit about your thought behind it, how it came to pass, and picking players. And I also, if not to make the question too wide, but what's your process when you sit down to write a piece of music? Are you thinking, I'm going to come up with a melody, I'm going to come up with a harmonic structure, have a rhythmic idea? Just kind of curious, picking your brain as how you approach things as a composer as well.
Well, that's a big question. I think my process has changed over the years, and it's certainly, I'd like to think it's gotten better. I think one thing I've learned, having done it, and knowing the tunes that sort of hold up for me over the years, that I still like to play, that I've written a long time ago, so certainly most of them don't hold up. And I often ask myself, why do these hold up? And then I also ask myself, I think about standards like Body and Soul and All the Things You Are. Why are we still playing these songs? Like, these songs were written in the 20s and 30s. So one thing I think about, for any composition is why am I still playing this? In terms of process, one thing I've found is that if I'm creating or generating an idea on sort of a tool that I'm comfortable on, like the trombone, I tend to create better music for myself. So I think the first compositions that I wrote when I was just dabbling with it, because I'm fairly untrained in terms of writing. I figured a lot of things out by myself, so there was obviously just a huge amount of trial and error. I wrote a lot of initial compositions on piano, and a lot of those tunes, harmonically they're kind of cool, I suppose, but I don't return to them because I think that if you're not creating a really compelling melody first, to me, a good melody will create great rhythm and harmony. Harmony and rhythm will be a byproduct of a good melody. So lately, I did a record prior to Jigsaw that was called Roots and Transitions, and there were a number of reasons why I chose the trombone to write, but one of them was I had just had a son. I had just won a grant. The grant stipulated that I write this hour-long piece of multi-movement piece of music in just a few months, and of course I procrastinated a little bit because he was born and we're just like, you know, the new dad, I don't know what the hell I'm doing, you know. And then now I've got 3 months to go. I'm like, oh, great, you know. So I sat down with my horn because I had to play. You know, as we know, it's an unforgiving instrument. And I didn't have time to divide between this writing and this playing. So I had to just I had to practice compositionally, basically. So I would sit down with my horn and just start to basically practice more compositionally and come up with little ideas and melodies. And it was really hard at first, but because the trombone is a limiting instrument, I mean, it's a limited range. It doesn't play chords, you know. I mean, you can arpeggiate, of course, but there's a lot of reasons why it's easier to write something on piano. You can very quickly dress up a mediocre melody with attractive harmony and convince yourself that it's cool. It's like, oh yeah, this is great, man. You know, no, it's not. I mean, it's like the whole, you know, polishing the turd syndrome. It's like, if the melody isn't strong, then well, basically on the trombone, if you know, it's very revealing when a melody is not working or not. So I generated all these linear melodies and tried to build in a lot of rhythmic propulsion into the melodies. And I just found that by doing that record, by carrying through with that process on the trombone, it created music that I really feel extraordinarily proud of and a strong connection with every track. So that also speaks to the process of writing not on the computer, which is another big pitfall, I think. I think it works for some people, but I think that whenever I've tried to write something on the computer, it never really works out. And I've found that for some reason, I mean, everything ends up on the computer for sure after I've gotten enough on paper that I'm happy with. But I found for myself that subconsciously the computer is writing a lot of music for me. I don't even realize it, but like if I write an AABA tune or something on the computer, and then I'm like, oh, just sort of copy and paste, you know, the first day to the last day. It begs the question, did I really write that last day, you know, or did the computer write it? I mean, by actually sitting down and writing the last day, even if your intention is to copy the first day, you're writing each note, and then you'll more often than not get to a point where like, well, man, actually, you know, this probably a little variation here would be cool from the first day. Maybe I'll start this on the end of 4 instead of 4 this time, and little things start to change. And I think there's a huge amount of discovery that was made in that regard. You know, I think the computer is a really important tool for writing, but I also think it can inform musical choices, particularly with the MIDI playback function. That it can inform musical choices that you're not necessarily hearing or connecting with, and that brings up a whole other Pandora's box of things, which is writing things that aren't playable. Asking the impossible of the musicians because, well, the MIDI can do it, why can't you, you know? So I like to, you know, it's my personal style, but I like to kind of stay analog for as long as possible. Even record things into my phone, little ideas that I like, and revisit them. And then when I have something that I'm really feeling good about, something that really dances on the trombone, then I move it into the computer, because there's a point where I just can't execute it anywhere anymore.
Sure.
Where I can hear it. So move it there, and then I take it from there.
Wow, that's a really thank you for sharing all that. That's really cool in getting your insight. And we had a guest on the show a couple months ago, Eric Ewazen, the great composer, and his line was "flatter the instruments." And in terms of just what you just said, you know, not asking the impossible from instruments, and in checking out your music, I think you're a master at that. Like, it just sounds like the you know, that's probably why there's so much joy in the player's face when you see them playing, because they're playing something that's it's challenging for sure. You know, there's no question about that, but it's also it's like it's fair, it's like
Yeah.
there's a reward for rising up to that level, but you're not asking for not expecting to get a grand slam home run every time you come to the plate.
Yeah, and
So,
I do want to add one thing to this thought, which is something that I learned when I read from a Nelson Riddle book, who's one of my all-time heroes.
sure. Yeah.
He was a trombone player, and obviously moved into arranging. He talks about the trombone and how it informs his musical choices in terms of you can feel the connection between the notes on a trombone on a very visceral level. I mean, like if you play a minor six or something, you an A to an F or something, you just feel you can feel that connection between those notes, and it either feels good or it doesn't. And I think that puts trombonists maybe at a slight advantage in terms of writing, because not only are we literally in the middle of the band hearing this and really existing in a world of counterpoint, because often what we're playing is not the primary melody, it's something that is a counterpoint idea to something more sort of in the forefront. But it's also we're also dealing with material that very easily could be just a bunch of whole notes. I think when the trombone section, when we're playing something that like a really thoughtful melody that is really brings us joy to play or whatever, that filters outward in the band. And when writers or whatever are considering those melodic choices in the middle of the band, not just the exterior parts of the band, when they're considering, and trombonists are hypersensitive to this, because I personally just get really bored when I'm playing a part where there's all this material going on above us, and then it's just like da da. It's like, what the... get me out of here. But if it's and this is Nelson Riddle, Duke Ellington, I mean Count Basie, those parts. Okay, maybe they're not like in the forefront, but they're so much fun to play on a rhythmic level, on a melodic level. You feel like a drummer, you feel like a trombonist, you feel like a singer sometimes. Just like this, they're very lyrical parts. That joy, I think, like when you know it when a trombone section is just feeling it, like it's just like, man, this feels great, and that just amplifies out. So I think that I always think about that Nelson Riddle thought of where he refers to the trombone as this sort of like this instrument where you feel the musical connection between the notes, and how that can inform your writing and compositional decisions, and how if it feels good on a trombone, it's probably going to feel great on any instrument, particularly horn, because the trombone is like there's certain things that are playable that they just feel really satisfying, and I do think that filters through all the instruments of the band.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's tremendous advice, especially for those of you interested in composition and arranging, and great stuff. I totally agree with you. There's so many really fine writers who play trombone, and Nelson, Johnny Mandel. Then you can shift over to the modern era, John Fedchuk, various folks, and
It's
Marshall
kind
Jokes,
of unbelievable.
Ryan Cabriolet. It's like, wow, it's amazing. I'm leaving out tons right now, so I feel bad. But
the list is just enormous.
It's tremendous. Alan, your success as a creative musician and as a band leader it's really fun to see the directions you're going and what you're contributing to the music. It's really fantastic. Let's talk a little bit about your work as a sideman. It's equally as impressive. Your discography is a who's who of creative music and of popular music. I'm just going to throw out a few names at you and just give me a quick response as to what you may have gotten from them. Sometimes we play on projects, and many of you have experienced it as well. You play on a project, the artist may or may not be there. Sometimes that can be a good thing. Sometimes it's when they're there, it's like an amazing experience, and you have more of an impactful experience. But anyway, throw out some names that I just picked a few. There's so many on your resume, but starting with Esperanza Spalding.
So Esperanza became a very good friend. So the way I met her was through my wife. My wife is a cellist, and she played on Esperanza's Chamber Music Society, which is the record that she made prior to Radio Music Society. And through my wife, I met Esperanza, and she hired me to play in her Radio Music Society. And I got to know her really well because we were actually on the same bus. And she knew I loved to write as well as play, of course. And we would stay up late on the bus talking about composers. And she was working actually a lot with Wayne Shorter at the time, who was one of my all-time heroes. And she would bring scores like onto the bus. She would be out there working with him and these orchestral scores of Wayne's, the handwritten scores. And we shared a big passion for Wayne, of course, and a lot of other people. But she was just Esperanza. I mean, it's hard to even begin with her because she's this larger than life personality. She has so much joy, and I think what I really admire about her is her integrity. I mean, she has there's I think a lot of pressure for her to, basically I think do a lot of things she doesn't want to do. People, they see someone really famous like that and they get dollar signs in their eyes and like, can you do this project? Because I think it'll make us a lot of money. I think there's probably, I would imagine maybe some she feels very conflicted about that. What I love about her is we would do these concerts and she would just do her thing and it would get pretty abstract on stage.
Wow. She
would absolutely embrace that. I mean, and it would be a huge hall. And we would start taking it to some other places and she would, instead of trying to veer it back into the accessible realm, she would get more excited and like actually push us there, like that kind of Miles Davis thing. So yeah, Esperanza is, I have the utmost respect for her as a musician and what she can do as a vocalist and a bassist, but also as a human being. Just a beautiful person. Wow. Absolutely very creative.
Awesome. Well, another beautiful person, an amazing musician, one of my favorite musicians in New York, Ted Nash. Obviously, his dad, an iconic figure in the world of trombone, that's for sure. But Ted, in his own right, one of the best musicians I've ever worked with. And I know you played on one of his big band CDs. Was that,
Chakra.
Yeah.
The Chakra Suite. But I met Ted through playing Broadway. I met him on a chorus line. Initially, I think that was the first show I met him on. I was subbing on chorus line. I think, as with a lot of people, yourself included, a lot of my heroes I met sometimes in these places where I would not expect it. And a lot of my big heroes I met playing in Broadway pit orchestras. And it's just amazing. It's like I would be playing with these guys. Like, wow. I mean, that's Ted Nash. That's Walt Weiskopf. That's, Mike Davis. It's like, what? It's Scott Wenholt. I mean, Broadway for me, like, particularly, I was doing it basically solid for 8 years and started doing my own shows. And to me, I talked about community a little bit earlier. To me, that was a great way for me to meet a lot of the community that I really came to New York to meet. And I got to play with these guys, and it was a way for me to also make that initial connection, so that when I created something that I wanted to, or whatever, if I had opportunities to play or write something, I'd be able to hopefully play with them again. So with Ted. Got a little off course there, but with Ted, I met on a chorus line, and we sort of hit it off. I mean, I told him I'm a big fan of his dad's, and I don't know. I felt a real connection with Ted, being he was from the West Coast, and I think we see eye to eye on a lot of things musically, and working with him in his big band. I mean, I just love. I mean, the thing I loved about that particular project is just the way he writes these vibrant swinging melodies with. I mean, it's so hard to do that because a lot of my students are like, oh, I'm going to write a tune like with functional changes, that swings, and then they bring it in. It's like it's just not happening. You know? I mean, Ted is like, you know, he's from that era. I mean, not only from that era, his dad was like, he played with all the greats, Mancini, you know, you name it.
Yeah.
And I felt a lot of that history in Ted's own writing. But then also like this, I felt really connected to it because he has this contemporary tilt to it as well. And the way he blends those two things, to me, is very Ted. It's very honest. And then, of course, he picks up any axe and just shreds, you know, makes so much music on flute, saxophone. It's like, man, what can the guy can't do? I mean, like, he's just like amazing. So,
Yeah.
I love Ted.
Yeah, very cool. I saw this video just last week, and I was just blown away hearing this Miguel Zenon's big band, of which you were a part of. I think it was at Newport. And first of all, the trombone section, when it's Tim Albright and Ryan Keberly and yourself, it doesn't get much better than that. But the writing blew my mind. It was just like, anyway, I was dying to ask you about that experience and different, you know, music than we're talking about previous. But what was that like for you?
I mean, Miguel, you know, he's Puerto Rican. The thing about his music that I love is that he blends these sort of folksy Puerto Rican, beautiful Puerto Rican melodies with this really almost Steve Coleman-esque rhythmic cycle-oriented things and very polyrhythmic rhythmic undercurrents underneath these beautifully soaring lyrical melodies. And the thing that I remember the most about Miguel's band is the first rehearsal because, you know, as with most bands, they send you the music and you check it out a little bit. They send you the PDFs and, oh, this looks no problem, you know. So like I looked at it and get to the first rehearsal and I mean, I wouldn't, this is not understandable. It was like maybe within 3 or 4 bars, it was like, I'm lost. And the reason is in a lot of his charts, he wrote it in 1 meter, but it felt like in another meter. Like it felt like it was in 5, but it was actually in 4. What you're seeing isn't corresponding with what you're hearing, and it's like, what is going on? You know.
It was amazing watching him conduct when he wasn't playing, conducting the band.
You
exactly
get the
where I was thinking the exact thing. If I was playing this, I'd be lost right now. Like, what is happening? But
it's just it was a real wake up call for me.
Yeah.
Because and I talk about this. I talk about specific experience with students. Like never. I mean, always do your homework, and then when you think you're done doing your homework, review. You know? Because with Miguel, that his rhythmic thing is so deep, and then of course he hears. If you're just a fraction of a second late or early on something, he's just like he's going to. he hears it. So you need to be really on point with his stuff, and you know I practiced a lot on just feeling those polyrhythms and trying to really. I mean, he's dancing to the whole thing. He's just like moving with it like it's nothing.
Yeah, you
know,
could tell he
so
certainly feels that.
It's the beauty of New York, you know. It's like we get to swim. I mean, jazz encompasses so much now, where we get to swim in this this kind of melting pot of musical influences. And with that particular project, it was like Puerto Rico, you know, it was like these Afro-Cuban folkloric, you know, things melding with the jazz big band tradition. And Steve Reich kind of thrown in there, but then also some like, you know, some Ellington. I mean, very unique and compelling, and I think that's a very particular to New York thing. You know?
Yeah. Very cool. And lastly, the last artist I wanted to, as many of you may know about Alan's career, he's also very in demand in the indie rock world. And I was wondering about your experience with Sufjan Stevens. I thought it was an interesting artist too for trombone players to get to work with. And I know there's been a few, but not many. So your impressions?
Well, I actually knew him. We lived in the same neighborhood in Brooklyn for a while. He had so I'd see him around, you know, here and there. But I was also kind of in this little scene of trombone players that were in this indie rock world. So me and a guy named Dave Nilsson and Tim Albright, we all, for one thing, we lived in the same neighborhood. And I mean, I've known since I was 14, so I would consider him one of my closest friends for sure. I've known him since my first jazz camp. You know, we were in the all-state band together in California. It's like from every step of the way. We were on the road with Fosse for a while. I mean, it was like, so we had this, like, we would always hang together, and we just got sort of swept up in this. And Ben Lands, he was the other guy. He's with the National right now, the indie rock band. So we would all do these indie rock sessions, which a lot of them were happening in the studio in Ditmas Park where we were living. But then Sufjan had a studio near the East River and kind of I guess the Brooklyn Heights area or whatever. And he would write these just amazing compositions and he just heard trombone all over them. So we would go in for these epic sessions. I mean, like 6 hours, 8 hours, just like page after page. I want to do this, and like, you know, just pounding for forever. So he'd get way more than he needed. He was kind of a maximalist in terms of the recording process. He would just get all this material to work with, and then he would eventually pare it down to what he needed. Because we'd hear the finished product, and it would be like, okay, there's a fair amount of trombone, but not like it was.
Yeah, right.
But I really like him because he would marry all these different influences. I mean, you hear Baroque music in his stuff, and
That's
minimalist
awesome.
classical music, and this and that. He's amazing.
Yeah, that's so cool. Great to see new contemporary artists that dig trombone. You can't argue with that. You know?
I know.
Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about your work at NYU. And I know you've taught at a variety of places as a faculty member. Also, of course, you're very active as a guest artist around the world, really. But talk a little bit about, you've been so generous sharing your teaching and ideas. It's like we're taking a lesson as we have the interview. It's great, but a little, what's going on at the program over there. I know you've got Alex Sipiagin and lots of wonderful things happening there. So tell us about NYU.
Yeah, well, they've got me doing a lot of things. I mean, they're certainly stretching my skill set to the limits. I teach privately a combination of trombone students and composition students. And this semester I have 13 students, which is a lot. I mean, that's...
Wow. Yeah, that is a lot. Yeah.
It's cool though. I mean, I just got to stay organized. So, and usually I have, it's seeming levels off around 10 or so. So it's a good load. And then I run 2 ensembles. I run a nonet ensemble that they kind of allowed me to design since I had a lot of these charts. And a smaller group ensemble, which this semester is just a quartet, which I'm playing in it, but it's guitar, piano, bass, and drums. And then I teach a composition arranging class, a graduate level class in the fall, and an undergraduate level improv class in the spring. So the nice thing about all that stuff is that I get to know just about every student in the program. Because at one point or another, they're filtering through either my lesson studio or my classes. So I mean, I love it. I get a chance to connect with the students. Over the years, I feel like I've gotten better at it, at teaching. I think teaching is it's one of those things where, I think after you've done it for a while, you start to realize what's working, what's not working, what's sticking, what people are really taking away, and what they're not. I mean, of course, every student is different, and some students learn in different ways, and of course at NYU it's very international, so I've got the language thing sometimes to deal with. But I don't know, in general, it's been a great experience for me, just working with a huge variety of students, not only in terms of ethnic diversity, but age diversity too. With the master's program, you get some. I have a fair amount of students that are older than I am, a lot that are younger, some people that are my age. It's cool. But I'm constantly thinking about how I can make it better.
You know, you've said, yeah, I can tell just from talking to you today that you would be a great person to study with, because you just have like a very clear and thoughtful way of presenting ideas. Is great, and I'll take some lessons from you. It'd be great. That's what we should do at the end of this. But it maybe, and you know, you've a lot of the stuff that you've talked about. It's just wonderful advice. But what do you see for the young generation of let's just say musicians? You know, I mean, we could say jazz musicians, but let's just broaden it out. I know, you know, for my generation, it was the tail end of a lot of studio work and whatnot. That's exists in some element, like we're talking about with the indie rock thing and whatnot. Those things come up, but it's not like you can just be a studio musician anymore. You have to be more doing everything. What's your outlook? And I know I've spoken to some Darius Christian Jones. I can't remember if he goes by Christian Darius or Darius Christian, but we did a gig together. He's like your biggest fan. He just said how much what he got out of you was amazing. But here's a young man playing trombone, having success. He's got the right combination of elements to me, just in that one meeting with him. But what do you present to your students, and then how do you guide them in terms of, I want to make a living as a musician?
You know, one thing I try to instill in them, and particularly at the college level, because there's a lot of things, there's a lot of baggage, I think, that students have. I mean, for one thing, they're dealing with being away from home, they're dealing with being out of their country, whatever. I try to, you know, ultimately, what I try to get them to believe is that they need to be themselves in the end. You know, when they get out of school, I want them to believe also in themselves, because oftentimes, you know, you mentioned Darius. I mean, in jazz school, sometimes, to me, I find this conflict with some students. They want to do some things that aren't necessarily jazzy, you know, like Darius wanted to sing, and he wanted to write his own songs that were not necessarily jazz-oriented. And I get a number of students like that. And instead of discouraging it in light of, like, we have to do this assignment, or you have to do all these drop two voicings, and you can't, you know, you have to tamp down all this other stuff that you really want to be doing. I mean, obviously, you need to teach them the fundamentals, and that universally will never change no matter what area you're in. Every student has to have sound fundamentals. I mean, you can't avoid that. You can't go out there and not be able to play in tune, in time, so forth. So that's just like, that's non-negotiable with a student. If they're not going to work on fundamentals, then good luck to you.
Yeah, it's not going to work.
But I also really encourage people, if they're really, because again, everyone's different, and some people have a really solid idea and passion of what they want to be doing, their ideal kind of like picture of what their career is. I try to really support that and encourage it in the context of our lessons or whatever we're doing in our class. I mean, obviously you can't get to everything, but I do try to help them believe in what they want to be doing instead of discourage it. And I think that in some cases, if they do have a teacher that maybe says, well, that doesn't swing or something, so forget about that. You don't, just forget about that. Don't do that. If you're really feeling that, well, why? Then that creates some psychological issues I think for a student that maybe takes a while even after they graduate to reconcile. So that's my philosophy anyway. I mean, I'm strict in terms of, like, you know, making sure they're doing the work and building the tools they need to be successful musicians. I mean, just again, like, there's certain fundamental things. When we talk about basketball, I mean, you see Steph Curry out there doing his routine every pregame warm-up. It's like, there's a reason he's hitting 91% of his free throws.
Right.
It's not just because he grew up that way. I mean, yes, he has natural gifts, but he puts the work in.
Yeah.
You know, that's a 10-foot shot that's you have to just do over and over and over. And the same is true with trombone. If you're not doing your long tones, flexibility, whatnot, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So, you know, with students, you're dealing with all these different people coming in, you know, hour after hour. So you're shifting gears a lot, but, you know, there are certainly universal things. But I think that for the most part, I try to help them also achieve their own personal goals whenever possible. And of course, I'd be honest with them. I try to be really honest with them. It's overwhelming for them sometimes when they're getting close to graduating. Like, what am I going to do now?
Yeah.
Of course, I try to help them find opportunities, but that's where I always go back to be proactive. You basically live in a time and you're entering the scene at a time where there's almost unlimited outlets for you to get your stuff out there. Sure, it's a crowded field of content, but you don't have to find a record label anymore. I mean, to disperse your music. And also you don't even have to play out anywhere to have an audience. I mean, we could be sitting here in a room, play a tune with a band, and you could have an audience potentially of millions. It's crazy, but that's the reality, and I think that there are opportunities there.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I think that's a really good, really healthy way to look at it, because especially for guys at my age, it's always, oh wow, man, you missed, should have been here when,
Right, of course.
But of course, everybody was saying that when I was 21 years old, and when you were 21 years old. So
they're always, I feel like they're always going to say that.
But I think that's such a great point. You have unlimited opportunities. Not to say that it's easy, and not to say, like you said, it is a crowded field, but still, and you're living proof of it. I mean, you're creating this amazing stuff through your big band and non-net. Alan, thank you so much for coming up today. As we wind down, I want to make sure everybody gets a chance to see the CD. This is Jigsaw, the Alan Ferber Big Band. And I know you're heading out to LA, right, to do some CD release events out there. What else is, what's on the docket for the next couple of years, or are you just thinking right now about the Jigsaw gigs?
No, definitely not. I do have some things in LA. I'm also guesting at Stanford University next month, playing a lot of that music.
Okay.
I'm going to be a guest conductor with the All-State Band, one of the All-State bands in New York, where, we'll be playing traditional things, but they did say they'd love to play a couple of my charts. We'll play with some high school kids, which will be fun. In addition to that, I've been actually busy this year with various other projects. Not of my own, but I remember asking you about this. I did a project with a singer in LA, Shoshana Bean. It was it was a big band project, but not necessarily a jazz project. So it was like a Rihanna tune, Ed Sheeran tune, Aretha stuff,
cool.
all over the map. We recorded it in August with a great LA big band, and that should be coming out, I'm guessing, I'm not sure, later next year. But that was I felt like I did 2 records this year, because that was just an enormous amount of work, doing all the arranging for that. So that's obviously on my mind. I did a couple things for the Brussels Jazz Orchestra that is probably going to be coming out, so some Joni Mitchell charts.
Cool.
That I'm also excited about. So, a lot of things in the works I'm excited about.
Yeah. Well, great stuff, and continued success. Thanks so much for coming up to New City to see us today.
Thank you.
It's as always inspiring to follow your career, and both from composing and as a player. So, thanks, Alan. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Mike.
And we will see all of you next time on Bone2Pick.